So one of the main questions that we've both been getting asked at the moment is this idea of, have you missed the boat? There seems to be FOMO back in the market since we haven't seen this much FOMO since 2020, 2021.
That's what it feels like. Like everybody feels like they've missed the boat, but it's such a nuanced question, right? Like it's not relevant to everybody. Like, you know, so many people have not missed the boat, but you know, there has been a fair few people that may have missed the boat as well. So it's like, got to look at your individual situation to figure out whether or not, but like, what's your opinion?
You know, my opinion is yes and no.
Yeah.
Like if you had bought just like immediately after the last GFC, then you've certainly missed the boat in Sydney and Melbourne, right? Because both of those markets from that time doubled in value. But, you know, on the flip side, if you're buying now with the intention of owning Sydney or Melbourne for the next 20 or 30 years, like this is going to be a once in a lifetime buy for you. So it's all contextual as to like, what is your time horizon and what you're trying to do. Like for me personally, when we had a good look, and I'll talk about this later in the video, at some of the markets and suburbs around Australia, there's certainly some markets and some suburbs that I wouldn't personally buy, like based on their 10-year performance. And then there's others, hundreds of others that look phenomenal right now. So for those suburbs, they're at the bottom or the middle of their like 10-year cycle. And then some of them are like well above the top of them. So it's very contextual, but I think the question that people should really be asking is not, have I missed the boat, but is there opportunity in the Australian property market to still get great medium-term and long-term gains, great cash flow, great tax benefits and time markets? And my answer to that question is absolutely yes.
Yeah, and I think if we, you know, look at this super outlier black swan event of COVID, you know, prior to COVID, you literally could have almost gone and bought a property anywhere in Australia outside of Melbourne and Darwin, and it's done pretty well. So like it gave everybody this false sense of hope that like, oh, I can invest. Like I'm a really good property investor because literally no matter where you bought, it's gone up dramatically.
50%, right?
Exactly. So it's like, that's huge gains, and it gives everybody this false sense of confidence. But now I feel as though we're back to what we consider a more normal market, a balanced market, where it's like, you can't just go buy anything anywhere. You've really got to be able to analyze the markets and figure out, you know, where is statistically undervalued and what does have potential for capital growth in the short to medium term future.
Yeah, so like if we look at two markets that people seem to be loving at the moment, one being Brisbane, one being Perth, right? When you and I sat down and we looked at 30 key performance indicators across every single suburb within 60 Ks of Brisbane and Perth, some of those markets like have done 10 to 12% per year in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
So what that says to me when I look at like the longer term context of a real estate cycle, and man, we're just getting straight into shit right now. It's like, whoa, welcome
That's
to
the way
podcast.
to do it. No Vaseline today.
Yeah, no Vaso. I'm glad you're... No, that's awesome.
Mickey Avalon. I was listening to Mickey Avalon recently, and I'm like just cruising going, I should wind my windows up.
Yeah, some rude stuff, eh? But yeah, I suppose when I looked at these two markets, right, and I looked at the long-term history, so according to Phil Anderson's work, he sort of suggested that when he looked at the last 3 20-year cycles, so 60 years worth of data in each capital city. I don't know why I'm using my hands so much because we're doing a podcast.
I like it. I'm following. Ben must have some Italian in his like heritage somehow. He's always using his hands to explain things.
I remember people on YouTube for a while were like, are you guys on crack?
You'll do it on strategy sessions over the phone, man. I'm like watching you in your office and you're like using your hands. I'm like, man, you're on the phone.
I remember this chick once.
I do the same.
I was pulled up to a set of lights in the car next to this girl or this lady, and she was like definitely talking to her friend about what happened the night before, and she was like using her hands, and she's like, it's this big, no, it was that big. And I was just laughing, and as she saw me looking through the window,
she would have been dead.
So red and just took off.
She would have been dead. That's so embarrassing.
There. But yeah, so basically when he looked at this 60-year history across every capital city in Australia, he found that most of them from the start of a cycle, which is the end of a GFC, until the next one, we should see about 120 to 130% growth, depending on which capital city. And it really didn't matter. Like, they all seemed to do over 100%, which was cool.
Especially when you look at the declining phase as well. And it was like 15 to 20%.
Yeah, not even, like 8 to 12% for Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane and Perth. I suppose when you average in
all of the regional markets
though, as well, yeah, it might look a little bit heavier. So that's when I started to sleep better at night, because I was like, well, these declines that America experiences aren't as severe in Australia. It's because our banking system is so regulated, it's so hard to borrow money.
And all you got to look at is, like, you know, where we are in the cycle, like when that particular cycle began in an exact state. And we typically see like Sydney and Melbourne recover pretty quickly. Like Melbourne recovered quickest last time, followed by Sydney. And then it generally ripples out through the rest of the country. You know, it'll get up to Central Coast, Newcastle, down to Wollongong, Shoalhaven, you know, over to Geelong, Mornington Peninsula, and then Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast, Brisbane. It kind of, like, when you look at the long-term growth rates around the country, you can see that ripple effect, and you're like, wow, it just like starts here and then it just goes out further from there. And it helps you to look at, okay, well, where is any given market or suburb in context to that longer term cycle? And it's like, well, we know that Brisbane's real estate cycle didn't even really begin until 2018, 2019 probably. And so we're still within that 10-year period. So when you look at the 10-year average growth rates, if it's above 10%, you know that that market's doubled in value since the real estate cycle began.
It's priced in.
It's priced in. If it's below that, then it's worth diving a little bit deeper.
You know, that's exactly where I was going with that. And thank you for bringing it back to that. No, that's exactly where I was like trying to get back to before we started to talk about all this other stuff. That, you know, with what I was thinking personally is that when I looked at the, 450 suburbs in Perth and Brisbane, or 800 combined, I found that some suburbs have priced in a full cycle. Like, some of them have clearly done 120% growth. And then some of them very, very, very close that are overlooked for a whole bunch of reasons. Now, think about that Moneyball movie. It's like when they're like, players are overlooked for a whole bunch of reasons. One, he doesn't look the part. He doesn't have great shape. He's got a funny throwing style.
He went to a crappy school, whatever it might be.
Exactly. And people do the same with everything in life. They overlook, well, there's planes that fly in over these particular suburbs. And I'm like, I'm not saying you should go out there and buy them. But when the plane flies over this particular suburb based on this runway twice a day, and the neighbouring suburb is 100% more expensive in the last 5 years just because of that one thing. Or, for example, when we started to buy Queensland from Sydney, it was like, well, don't go near Logan, don't go near Ipswich. And
don't
it's like
go near Redland Bay.
At that time, it made sense. And then it's like, North Brisbane is 100% more expensive right now. When we started to go into those markets, we're buying places for 300K that have literally in 5 years doubled, almost tripled in value. So when you know how to look for the data, in terms of this idea of, have you missed the boat? Absolutely, if you don't know what you're looking for and you think that the boat's going to rise with the tide across every suburb in every city. But if you know where to peek behind the curtain in Sydney, Perth, Adelaide, Brisbane, there is value everywhere. It just might look a little bit funky based on history. But as that rising tide lifts those further suburbs from the city, or those ones that, might be half affected by a bushfire, for example, in New South Wales or Victoria, or they might be one stop away from a train station instead of on the train line, like they're the ones right now that look phenomenal.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think it comes down to like your idea of value as well. Like, we had a lot of predispositions about suburbs in Sydney and Brisbane, just based on emotion.
It was 100% emotion. Not
based on logic, not based on data. And like, now that we've been studying this so closely, day in, day out, week in, week out, every single year for, 15 years for you, almost a decade for me. And, you start to see, it's like, how many opportunities have we missed out on? Man. Like, the amount of suburbs where like, oh, I don't like the look of that suburb, where we could have bought a cheap property there back in the day and, done really well from it between now and then. But like, a lot of people get attached to that emotion. It's like, look, we're investing, we're following the trends, we're following the data, we're using that Moneyball approach to be like, well, statistically, this location looks undervalued right now. And for me personally, right now, knowing what I know, I much prefer to invest in that statistically undervalued suburb rather than going out there and buying a $1 million property in, you know, the suburb that I live in right now. Like, you know, whilst I would prefer to own more properties in the suburb I live in because I love it, I think it's a really good area, but it doesn't look as good on paper as these other areas. So it's just like peeling back those, you know, biases that we all have and just like looking at the underlying fundamentals and statistics and going, okay, well, that looks undervalued right now. And based on history, we should see a little bit more growth there.
I love that. So when you overlay history, like 60 years per capital city, and then you overlay our knowledge of, you know, what happens when a market's only done 2 to 5% per year for the 10 years leading up to now versus 10 to 15% over that same time. So this was reaffirmed through some Jeremy Shepherd information that he did on a video with Ryan from On Property. And basically what he did is he looked at each of the capital cities in Australia and then he broke it down to a suburb level too to prove it at a suburb level. When you look at a 20-year chart, generally suburbs that have done really, really, really well in the first 10 years stabilize over the second 10. Suburbs that have done really, really, really badly in the first 10 years go up in the second 10. And it's just common sense. It's like Sydney and Melbourne got to a point before COVID because they haven't really done meaningful growth since COVID. Like if you factor in the inflation we've had, they've sat in flat. Obviously there's suburbs that have won and there'd be many people watching this going, well, I made 600K on my home. And it's like heaps of our clients did as well. It's more the averages we're talking to here. These markets get to a point where they're unaffordable for the local population. And then when the international speculator isn't allowed into the market, which is what the Australian government stopped in 2015 to 2017, then they become reliant on, well, yeah, the average family in Sydney is now earning 200K per year with their combined incomes, which is crazy. But if the property is 2 mil, the banks aren't going to touch them. And so it's recognizing that it's not that Sydney and Melbourne don't have monster amounts of future value. They do. Based on history, they've doubled every 10 years and probably in the future, they'll double every 15 for the remainder of our lifetimes as they move towards cities of 10 million people. But it's that they've hit a ceiling and Brisbane, Perth and Adelaide haven't hit that ceiling yet. So it's the incomes in all of these markets are the same now as Sydney and Melbourne, but the price points for like product in some of these areas is still 30 cents in the dollar. And that's what's driving these markets on top of our analysis of history and the analysis of suburbs at a local level.
And what's been hard at the moment as well is like serviceability as well, you know,
Real
like
tough.
let's be real. Like if you know, have a budget of say like 3, 4, you know, even $500,000 these days, it's very, very difficult to find a property in a market that has good future growth potential. And so like, if you do have a lower budget, you know, the answer to today's podcast is probably, yes, you have missed a boat if you were hoping to get in for say $300,000 or $400,000.
In a market like Perth, Brisbane, Adelaide, Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra.
Yeah.
But, you know, not in Bendigo, not in Ballarat, not in Townsville, not in Darwin. Like there's plenty of great markets around and product that's different in those markets too.
And that's the thing. I think everyone puts more preference on these bigger cities that are more well known, that like people have got friends or family, or they've got more of an association with that area because like it's a big city. Yep. You know, it's now just realizing, cool, well, that ship has sailed. You have missed the boat in those markets with a lower budget, but now you just got to get creative and go, okay, well, if I can't afford to buy, you know, a $500,000 house or apartment in Sydney anymore, well, where can I get into at this point in time? And like really just thinking about how long you're thinking about holding it. Like so many people in Perth, Brisbane, Adelaide have done so well over the last 5 years that everybody thinks that that's the new norm.
Yeah, like doubling your money isn't a norm in 5 years. That's an absolute outlier event.
Exactly. So just extending out that time horizon and start thinking decades as opposed to years, I think is really important. Like that gave everybody another false sense of hope that like I can double my money through property in a really short period of time. But that was more of a COVID thing rather than, you know, an underlying fundamental. Because when you look at the history, when we looked at the 50 years worth of data from Homely, the amount of times in Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane or Perth where the property market increased by more than 20% in a single year, you could count on one hand.
Yeah, and I think in Brisbane it was a handful, and then in some of the other markets it was like once or twice. And that's happened twice in the last 5 years in some of these markets. But the thing is, like, I know there's beachside suburbs in Brisbane, for example, that have done 12 to 13% a year. Places that I was buying for clients 10 years ago that were 450, 500K that are now 2 mil. And then the suburb next door over the same period of time has gone from 650K to 850. And it's like, for me, I'm like, that's 4Ks further from the city. Like, I know what I would be statistically buying. And it's more than a intuitive thing now. Like, it is so data backed based on the things that we share with our clients. But, you know, we've been playing with compound growth calculators enough for me to put this question on the spot. If you were to go out and buy a 600K property now and it grew by just 5% a year for the next 15 years, what's this 600K property going to be worth in 15 years?
Well, it'll more than double. You know, it only needs to do 4.8% compounded over 15 years to double. So 5% would just be slightly higher. So it ends up coming in at about $1.3 million.
So if you're thinking about this the way that you and I are, which isn't about getting rich quick now, but it's about, I have a long-term plan for financial peace, financial freedom, a passive income for life, and massive amounts of choices in retirement. Like, if you were to go out there and follow something like our 3 properties, the financial freedom strategy, and you go slowly over the next 5 or 10 years and buy 3 houses worth 600 grand each in the right markets at the right time, using history as your guide, you're going to have $1.8 million worth of property that in 15 years time is going to be 3.2. And in 30 years time, based on that model of 5%, is going to be what, 6 point plus?
A lot of property. I don't even know off the top of my head, but like every time I do this online during strategy sessions with clients, it's like, holy crap, if we start to extrapolate this out to like 15, 20, 30 years, depending on where you're getting started, it is mind-blowing numbers.
So this is the thing, like, you know, have you missed 20% growth in Perth this year? Yep. Have you missed 15% in Townsville,
Brisbane,
South Australia and Brisbane? Yes. Does that matter if you're buying a 600K property today with a 15-year intention it's going to be worth 1.2, or in 30 years it's going to be worth 2.4? Absolutely not. And I think so much of what's driving the market at the moment is this looming, we're going to drop interest rates vibe, and everyone's trying to rush in before that happens now. And we're noticing it in our business, like the number of people reaching out has quadrupled in the last 3 or 4 months.
And you and I have been like pulling our hair out over the last 2 years throughout this like interest rate rising cycle and this like really negative media cycle as well. Because when you look at all of those fundamentals of, you know, population growth, unemployment rates, vacancy rates, wage growth, like all of these incredible things that look better than ever. It's just so wild, and it just comes back to like how important or how much of an impact sentiment and like media narratives do have on the way people feel. Like, we just recorded the monthly market update before we jumped into this podcast, and even in October of 2024, it's sitting at below 85 points, which is the same level, if not lower, than it was during the global financial crisis. And it's just wild to think that like we've got 4.1% unemployment rate. We've got, you know, less than 2% vacancy rates across the board, except for Canberra in Australia, which is at 2.1, by the way. You know, everybody's earning money. You're just saying, like, you know, a lot of Aussie households over 200K per year, like, mind-blowing. Like, yes, we've got high interest rates. Yes, we've had high inflation. Yes, the cost of living has gone up. This has had a really negative impact on Australians' household savings, but distressed listings aren't going up. They're still staying low. So it's just this conundrum.
Listings are down, and you know, it is hard for a lot of people. And I just want to say that, like, as a person that cares about people the same as you, I've got friends and family members that have struggled. I've got many past clients that are like, oh, this is hurting. And then I was listening to something yesterday when I was doing my like morning training session, and I was like, it was Hormozy talking with, is it Chris Williamson? Williamson. And he was saying, if you want to be extraordinary, and every single person listening to this is listening to this podcast because they do want an extraordinary life. Now, an extraordinary life isn't necessarily like jumping on YouTube and sharing it all. An extraordinary life isn't anyone knowing what you're up to. An extraordinary life isn't doing something remarkable and being a LeBron James or a Britney Spears. An extraordinary life to me is being a good dad, being a good friend, having time to do the things that you love, to figure out your purpose and your values, and to be able to do that. The things that we were talking about this morning, like your vision for the new year, my vision for the new year, like giving your future self choices that you can't even imagine today.
I love that. Like, I would even simplify it even further. For me personally, it's like my extraordinary life is just doing what I want when I want.
Exactly.
Like, you know, when you feel as though you've got that freedom to do what you want when you want, you're just so at peace with yourself.
And so, like, let's say then that the majority of the noise that you hear on social and in the media is from people that have chosen unconsciously a normal life. But the people listening to this, like if you're earning 100K per year with 70 grand in the bank, or if you're earning 150 to 300K a year combined income with some great equity in your house or your investments, you're not in the noise of the media right now. Like, you're not in the middle of the bell curve in terms of globally. The most 1% of the world's wealthiest people would be earning 35 grand a year is what you need to do that right now, according to Alex Hormozy. That puts you in the 1% of the total global population's income earners. So if you put yourself like in that perspective, like firstly, if you're in Australia, you're killing it.
Yeah.
Secondly, if you're like not in the normal band curve of people and you've got cash, equity, and a good job right now or a good business, then why are we letting the 99% of people in Australia who are like not understanding cycles, not understanding history, not understanding data, not working with people that actually know their shit and that don't just talk about it but have done it well before they started talking about it, and going, well, there's a choice point. And the choice point for me is now, what does extraordinary look like? It looks like the person that you and I were just born to be, and the people listening to this are born to be. You don't have to try to be anything. The fact that we're producing this, I'm just talking about it like I'm my own fan. Like, the people that are listening to this are just people that are naturally going to be in that 1% category. So it's like, believe that you can do it. Like, believe that you can achieve freedom in 15 years. 10 years if you want to go as hard as you and I have. Like, that you can set things up now that might not look glamorous. Like, the first year you buy might be like some of the first years I bought were negative 15% years.
Yeah.
Did it suck? Not really, because I was like, I'm benchmarking this off where I'll be in 15 years based on history, not where I'll be this year. And the thing about tides is they turn. It doesn't stay positive forever, and it definitely doesn't stay negative.
And we live in such a quick lifestyle. That's a very bad way of saying that, but you know, everybody wants it immediately. Yeah, like, it's hard to get people's attention these days. Like, you know, if it's not captivating in the first second, it's like, you're dead to me, you're gone. It's like people's attention spans have gotten so much shorter in this age of social media. And like, I think watching everybody live their glamorous lives and doing, like, the only things that you see on social media is the best version of that person's life. So it's like you're benchmarking, you know, maybe your average to bad days on somebody else's best days. So immediately you're at a disconnect there and you're never going to be able to compete. So it's just recognizing that, like, these things haven't ever changed. Like, nobody's ever got rich quick that wasn't super lucky. Like, everybody has taken decades to build a level of wealth. Like, everybody that you look up to as being quote unquote successful has their scars, has their wounds, has their things that they've had to sacrifice to get to where they want to be. But a lot of people these days aren't willing to put in the effort, the sacrifice that's required to achieve the extraordinary life that you're wanting. It's like you want it, but you're not willing to do what it takes to get it.
Yeah, what are you prepared to trade? Well, I'll tell you what you're going to trade for it. You're going to trade some of your headspace. You're going to trade, unfortunately, a few relationships in your life. Like Hormozy was saying this yesterday. It was the best story I'd heard.
Yeah, I'll have to listen to it.
Yeah,
it was like a cracker.
It was actually just one of those like gym workout motivational things.
I love
like
those
my
ones.
mate sent it, photos just into him and he sent it to me and I'm like, this is actually the vibe.
Yeah.
But he said that when he was starting out, he was a dude that loved gym and he was in a gym that he'd started, his first one, and he was sleeping on the floor and people could clearly see that that was his bedroom and everyone was like, we want the best for you. We're all behind you. You're all in. It's so beautiful what you're doing. And his clients were building and everyone was like behind him because they're like, this dude's hustling. And at the time he's like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to have all these gyms, then I'm going to be in business and I'm going to be buying companies. I'm going to be investing. And they're like, yeah, while he was below them. And then he said, these people that I thought were like friends and that really had my back, that loved me, as soon as I got to that point, and then they're like the same people, like 2 years later, were like, oh, you still got time for us, Mr. Big Hotshot, and all that sort of stuff. And he's like, what he learned is that people want the absolute best for you as long as you're not doing better than them.
That's so sad.
It was so sad to hear that, but it was so true around like this idea that the average person is within 10% of their 5 closest people in their lives' incomes. And when we look at how we benchmark ourselves off people around us, if we're listening to the main commentary in the media and the main commentary in social, and we're the average of the people that we come up with, which is generally like people from very similar backgrounds, then we're probably going to end up with that. And if the average person that is in your life is retiring financially free in their 50s, 60s, 70s, or on the pension, then like unless you do something in terms of what you're prepared to trade. And so what you are going to trade is the loss of some relationships, unfortunately. Some people just aren't going to want the best for you. It's happened to me heaps. It's happened to you as well. Like, God, I could count 10 relationships in both our lives that have bounced in the last 5 years because all of a sudden Simon's not the uni dude anymore that's getting it together. Simon's like the dude that's fully got it together and now he's got this lifestyle to match.
And I think like this is something worth diving into a little bit deeper as well, a bit of a tangent, is like how to do that. Because a lot of people come to me and one of the other challenges that people face is they don't have a community of like-minded people.
Big time.
They just don't have the people that they can have these open, honest conversations about their big life goals that they want to achieve. And it's like, we're so fortunate. We've got each other. We're brothers. We've always had this dialogue. Like I think that starts from dad as well, being quite optimistic, goal-oriented, very open business person. That sort of rubbed off onto us. And like you and I are kind of brutal as well. It's like, if you rub us the wrong way, you are dead to us. And it's like, we're so happy to walk away from old relationships that no longer serve us because we know we're going to find new relationships that do serve us.
Big time.
But it's a big challenge that so many people face, is like this transitionary period. And Hormozy talks about it a lot as well. Like when you transition from who you were to who you're truly meant to be.
The lonely 5 years, they're starting to label it, Chris Williams too, like the lonely time of life where, sorry to interrupt you, but you're transitioning from who you are to who you were born to become. And for everyone listening to this, we're all transitioning at the same time. And so I'm just documenting it. Like the most meaningful convos you and I have are on camera.
Yeah.
Like I'm not holding anything back anymore. No. It's like, this is just where I'm at. And I'm just a messed up human that's trying to figure it out.
I think everyone is as well. And once you realize that, it takes so much weight off.
Yeah. I'm like, well, what works? And it's like, what works is creating a plan. But before there's a plan, there's a vision. And the vision for me, for you, and for everyone listening to this is, I want a life that I know is possible for me and that I believe should be coming, that I don't have right now. Like that's where it starts, right? Like I want something that I don't have, and I don't believe it's money for most people, although we call it that at the start because we don't have the language to label it. But what we really want is freedom, choices to do what you want to do, when you want to do it, with who you want to do it whenever you want to do it is the Tony Robbins 4. And so it's like, I believe that the vision is first. I want a life of freedom and choices. Then comes the plan, which is 12 months from now, I want to be here. 15 years, I want to be there. If you're anything like me, the 12-year plan will stack 15 years worth of shit in it and you won't do it. But in 15 years, you'll be 10 times further ahead than you thought you would have been when you set the 12-month goal. And life has a funny way of compounding for you with the right relationships, the right people, the right mentors, the right coaches, the right buyer's agents, solicitors, property managers. Like, you get stronger or you just get better.
That just naturally occurs through that process as well.
You don't have to do anything to become better except keep moving forward.
Yeah, I think like I would add into that like discipline as well. Like, you know, you've been reading the LeBron James book that you were telling me about off camera, and it's like the discipline that the best of the best have is
I don't have hand on heart.
Well, no.
I wish I did, but I'm not wired like that.
Neither do
I'm
I.
not a billionaire.
But exactly, and like I don't want to be a billionaire, but we do have great discipline with like savings habits. I had good discipline with spending habits.
Actually, we need to do an episode on how fucking off path we've both been with savings and keep each other publicly accountable for the next year.
You know how I just
Next potty.
I emailed you yesterday. I'm like, I'm changing my bank account.
Yeah, you did.
It's because I'm spending too much money, and I recognize this. So I'm like, what I've
Simon's
actually
just sold
done.
a property, and now he's like,
Brain
that's supposed to be in the homeland, right?
Well, Dale, you're saving me too much money on tax. No.
Simon's got a sauna. He's got a ice plunge.
I'm loving it, but it is a lot of money. But I listened to this guy, Steve Hawley, on Instagram. He does some really great reels. He's a mortgage broker in Sydney, and he was just saying like how to speed up paying off your home loan. I'm like, you know, I've been working quite hard and earning quite good money and, you know, investing that a lot. But now I'm not really in a heavy investing season. The properties are just like looking after themselves, and, you know, any projects that I plan to do, I can sort of do it on equity, which is really nice position to find myself in. So like my biggest goal now is like, how do I get debt free on my principal place of residence as soon as possible? And this thing comes up and he's like, just get your wage paid into your offset account every single week. This is what he said, and I've chosen to implement it personally, so this isn't advice for anybody else.
Yeah.
But it's like I get all of my wage, all of my bonuses paid into my offset account, and then that just keeps stacking up over time. And then what I've chosen to do is I'm going to pay myself $400 out of this each week. And it's coming back to that old pay yourself first sort of thing. So I'm paying myself first because my number one goal is to smash the debt on my principal place of residence. So put the money in the place where it's going to make that happen, my offset account. And then I just pay myself $400
That's
per
what you
week.
live off per week.
And that's all I live off per week. Like that's my coffee money, my beer money, my surfing money, my fun money. Like, and you know, if I need more than that because I'm splurging a little bit, I can get a little bit more if I don't spend as much, and I've got more to go for the next week.
Your bills and all that still come out of that offset chunk as well when they come up, like car loans, phones.
All the expenses come out of there because the income exceeds the expenses. It's just all income into there, all expenses out of there, and then that makes it super easy for Dale, my accountant. I just go, hey, here it is.
Yeah, and so the $400 as well is like a cap of like, okay, I've got $400 to spray. Some weeks I'll spend 100.
Yep.
And then the next week I've got 700.
Yep.
Other weeks I'll spend the full 400 or more.
Yep.
And I think I've hit the same thing recently because I'm so good at saving for a deposit. I'm so good at saving for a reno or a new build. I'm so good at like that. Hey, I want this caravan. Like I'm going to work towards it over the next few years and get it type vibe. I'm so shit. I've just realized that like committing to paying off debt. And so what I've decided to do as well is like back to the method. Like for the first 7.5, 8 years of this business, I was like, I'm going to pay myself an exact amount every single week. It's like all of my surplus income goes into offset too. And it's like, this is like what, not so much, because I have a temperament where I could spend to zero. My wife would spend to like minus $1 million. And so it's like, I just have I'm going to pay $2,000 a week off my debt vibe. And I'm not paying it off the debt. I'm just putting it into an offset account, and that's like a do not touch account. Like don't even go near it
Yeah.
vibe. And so it's like I'm consistently moving forward in my savings goal, and then I can spend a zero on whatever else is there because I'm like not
Guilt-free.
thinking about it, because I'm like, I'm just back to the simplest possible method.
What got us there is what will get us to where we want to be as well.
But yeah, to summarize that before we get into the gold nugget and the positive news, I don't think people have missed the boat at all. And that's in the short term, medium term, and long term cycles that are all happening. Whether you've got awareness of these things or not, these things are going on. And it's like the study of those things just makes life so much easier, because when it feels scary, it's just history repeating. When it feels amazing, it's just history repeating. And if you understand when to pull triggers on certain markets based on timing, you can exponentially improve your short-term returns and make your life so much easier in the future with that peace and freedom you're after. But in terms of the gold nugget, this was interesting. Now, I don't read the Australian Financial Review more than once a month, and mainly I'm just searching for property-related articles.
Only really one good property article per month anyway.
I'll get
attacked by journos.
Yeah, I'm not saying anything about anyone.
Come at me.
But for me personally, this article really stood out in the Fin Review. And so it was a whole bunch of different analysts forecasting where they could see different markets. In fact, every capital city in Australia in the next 2.5 years. Now, what was amazing is that the average house in Brisbane is $880K right now. Although we're buying properties, I think 3 in the last month for below $550K. Not always houses, sometimes townhouses, but there's a lot of value below median.
This is the median house price.
Should be at 1.2 mil, which is a $320,000 gain in the next 25 months.
Wow.
Which is phenomenal. Now, they suggested that Adelaide and Perth will be at about 1.1 mil, which is again $250,000, $300,000 gain as well. Sydney, Melbourne, some of those other markets, not so much upside.
Okay.
But it's just incredible to think about things in those terms that, yes, like some of these markets have gone up.
And that's like, we just worked out, that's like a 25-30% increase in property values over 2.5 years in Brisbane. Similar growth rates expected in Adelaide and Perth. But then when you look at the expectations, not from the Fin Review, but from Simon Priestley of Townsville, that market has upside of 50% according to him over the next few years. So it's like, these big capital cities look good when you look at your money on money return.
On money return, it's like out of like cash return, on deposit. If you're putting 10 or 20% down, you're probably getting your deposit 2 times over based on those numbers. But even on like total value, it's 25-30% is insane.
It's huge, and well above the historic averages that we've seen over the last 30-40 years anyway, which is beautiful to see. But then there is these little unique pockets of markets or states at the moment that also look like super statistically undervalued at the moment as well. And like, a lot of media is going to come out over the next few years about these regional markets. And I think this is like a show of caution to be like, do your due diligence and follow those fundamentals. Don't go and invest in a random town that's got 5,000 people that live there that's based off one industry.
Townsville's as small as I want people to go, which is 200,000 people personally. I know a lot of these other towns will do good, but for how long?
Yeah, I like to look at things, and this is like an NFL term. It's like the floor versus the ceiling of a team or a player in the NFL. And it's like, I like to use that for markets here in Australia. And it's like, Australia in general globally has like a very high floor. Like, our worst case scenario is better than, 90% of countries, maybe more. So our floor is really high, but then when you get into Australia, there's markets that have really high floors, like your Sydneys, like your Melbournes, like your Brisbanes, your Perths, your Adelaides, and the major regional markets as well, because what helps when things get hard is people. Because if there's still people there, those people are still looking for jobs. They're still spending money in the local economy.
5% of them lose their jobs, but there's still 95% of the workforce employed, and they can reallocate those skills elsewhere.
Yeah, so it's like, just understand the fundamentals and don't get too excited about a story of a particular market if it is just tied to one industry. And it's like people, of course, but industry as well. Like you need to look at like, is there a diverse economy here, or is it really just tied to this one sector of the economy that's booming right now?
You know, what's interesting is, you know, when I look at the data points and go, okay, like let's say Brisbane's done 127% growth on average each cycle, according to Phil Anderson, over the last 60 years. There are some suburbs that you and I know of that we're buying in very actively that have only done 5.5% a year for 10 years. So they're priced in 55% of 127% growth since the last GFC. And I sat with Phil, and so did you, before I really understood what he was showing me. And that dinner that we had with him where he was like, I see Brisbane suburbs, some of them going up 70% in the next 3 to 4 years. And I'm like, no way. And then I really started to put this together, and then I asked him for that information for the last 60 years. And when we got it, I'm like, oh shit, he's not saying that. He's looking at history, and he's looking at averages, and then he's looking at where individual suburbs are at. And there's some suburbs in Perth that could be as much as 80 to 90% below where they should be full cycle. There's some suburbs in Melbourne, Sydney, that 3-4 years ago had priced in 10 to 12% a year for 10 years that are now pricing in 6 to 7%. Melbourne in particular in 2 to 3 years from now is going to look very good. Like it's still got issues because 300,000 or 400,000 people just escaped, and the average person down there is still super, super pissed off with the government.
Yeah.
And they oversupplied the city with too much stuff.
Yeah.
And so this combination of things, like you cannot rebuild a city, and that's what they're trying to do based on internationals and students. They need it to be based on people that want to live there, that want to build lives there, that want to invest in homes there, not units. But when the mining boom comes off in Perth, probably 200,000 of those people are going to duck back across to the East Coast, and a lot of them will land in Melbourne because it will be the most affordable market to transition to outside of Brisbane at that time. And so it's just, I don't know, like it's a bit of a side bender there, but it's just...
Well, it's like, you know, Melbourne was super expensive until like now. You know, now that it's sat flat for 5 years and it's declining at the moment. So it's not a great area to be investing in right now because you're going to lose money over the next couple of years. But when you start to think about a 10, 15, 20-year play, you can see how like that market looks really interesting, and, you know, we'll be doing what we need to do to be buying down there soon enough.
You know, what I have like my personal gripe with, and you're the same, is averages don't relate to markets. And so in terms of this FOMO concept at the moment, have I missed out on Brisbane? Absolutely, you've missed out on East Brisbane, anything within 7Ks of the city, and a few suburbs on the north. Have you missed out for south, southern beaches, southwest, inner north? Hell no. And it's the same thing with Melbourne. Like Melbourne is, the new thing is like, and I put it up on our Instagram yesterday, is like Melbourne's now more affordable than Perth, Adelaide, Brisbane, Sydney, Canberra. But if you compare a beachside suburb, 17 k's from Melbourne versus a beachside suburb in Brisbane, Melbourne's 2.5 times more expensive still.
Exactly.
If you compare a quality inner city East Melbourne home with a quality inner city North Brisbane home, they're 3 times more expensive. So it's like Melbourne isn't cheaper, but they've just drawn a line 60 k's around the city, and like deep north is cheap, deep west is cheap. And all the shitty units in there that no one wants to own are cheap, and it's bringing down what the true Melbourne market looks like. And that's why we're not buying it yet, because Brisbane, like for like, is still significantly more affordable with much better incomes and average rents. But, you know, give us 2 to 3 years and we'll be talking about Melbourne in a big way.
And I think that's so important to say, especially with this video as well. It's like, don't follow the headlines. Like, read into the data. Like, don't look at something, oh, Melbourne's cheaper than like Sydney, then Brisbane, then Canberra, then Adelaide, then Perth right now. It's like, that could be that's a cool headline to read, right?
I'd click on it.
Yeah, but then
I'd still click on it.
And even if you go into it, they tend to avoid talking about that context, but it's like, you got to be able to put context to these headlines and you know, make it make sense, because it's like, if you live in Melbourne and you move to Brisbane and you're selling a house in Melbourne, as you said, 17 Ks from the city on the beach, and you're moving to Brisbane to buy a property 15 Ks from the city on the beach.
You're putting $1 million cash in the bank.
Exactly. And the reason we know that is we've probably helped 100 people over the last 4 years do that.
Big time. Look, I'm just frothing on this potty, by the way, but let's go into the last little segment, which is the positive news stuff. Positive news is I just looked at 8,000 suburbs and I just see holes everywhere in the market that people aren't seeing now. And so you haven't missed the boat. And I was starting to buy the hype. I'm like, is there still value? And I'm like, shit, after really looking at it properly, everywhere I look, there's value. Like, I can see value in Sydney, Melbourne. I can see value in Perth, Adelaide. I see monster value in Brisbane and Townsville.
Sunny Coast.
Sunny Coast isn't a market. Sunny Coast is
90 markets,
90 different suburbs with 2 different council areas, and one of them doesn't want anyone in Australia to be there. And it's incredible. And so you wrote down a little note here, like, there is still many affordable suburbs. And I added, there's many, many affordable products with incredible cash flow. And the podcast, or a recent podcast we did where we looked at, 3 different strategies to create wealth. Like, there is phenomenal value. In the last month, we bought properties that will set people up with 6 and 7% rent returns, hundreds of bucks a week of tax benefits, incredible growth if the growth heads the way that history is repeating. Phenomenally affordable properties. Like, we bought duplex sites for under 800K, under 700K in the last month. We bought townhouses for well below 550, 600. Like, there is good shit. You just have to shake the tree a bit. It's not like I'm just going to stumble in and get it now. It's like, there's 450 areas and 60 of them are great.
Seriously, and when you look at those entry-level duplex opportunities in Brizzy at the moment, insane. It's like, I've talked to a few, more experienced investors about this recently, and it's just such a no-brainer if you've got the money to play with that.
No-brainer.
To be able to do a duplex for $1.2 million in the 3rd largest capital city in Australia that's hosting the Olympics in 8 years from now.
When the duplexes, one of our team members is buying one in Engadine, 28, 32 Ks from the city where we grew up, 1.5 mil for one side. Whoa. Engadine. And these duplexes, it's so exciting, guys. So, I don't know. I'm investing. I just bought a commercial office building. But yeah, man, I'm grateful. I really enjoyed this podcast, and thanks for the time.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's good to bring some new ideas and just sort of go against the grain compared to the average at the moment.
If you're thinking about buying an investment property in the next 3 to 6 months, then the team and I at Pumped on Property would love to offer you a one-on-one strategy session. To book the session, all you have to do is go to www.pumpedonproperty.com and click that free strategy session button. Now, in the session, we'll talk about exactly where you are right now, where you'd like to be longer term, and educate you deeply on the Australian property market. You can then take that information and go and absolutely smash it on your own, or potentially become one of the small number of clients that we work with each month. Either way, we look forward to continuing to help you build your property portfolio with confidence on your journey to financial freedom.